Have you ever wanted to partner with Navigator 9 Podcast and feature your brand on our episode? Make sure to send us an email at navigator9podcast@gmail.com and let's partner together. We have different tiers that can help you become successful. Make sure to hit us up and we'll catch you in the email. On to the episode. Hello, everybody. It's Anukkah Laquette here, the host and creator of Navigator 9 Podcast. And if you're new, make sure to hit the subscribe button and click on the notification bell so you will not miss any of our episodes. We post on Mondays at 7 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time and Wednesdays at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you are a return subscriber, hey, Undeniable, welcome back. So, y'all, we have someone on the show. We have JD Barker. Hey, JD.
Hey, I feel like I need to ask a question. Where did the name of the podcast come from?
Okay, let me get started with that. So, Navigator 9, when I first started this, I was in a mindset of, like, I feel like I was delayed. And I was, like, talking to my camera. I was on social media, talking to my camera, telling everyone how I was delayed in life and everything, with education and just different things. And then I realized, like, it never gave a nine. Like, my life was, like, delayed, but everything that I did, I achieved. Everything I went out for, I achieved. I graduated college with cum laude. I did so many great things, even though I was delayed. So I felt like if I was like that, I know there's 10,000 plus people who are just like me. And my mission was to focus on small business owners, authors, dancers, singers, anybody from the creative space, and also community leaders who do not have the amount of following or are not seen a lot. And I said, ooh, I know if that's a problem for them, that they're not seen, I can have a platform where people can be seen and heard. And originally, it was meant for my hometown of Darlington, South Carolina. But then people were so inspired by the show that it told me, like, hey, can you interview me? I'm all the way in Louisiana. I'm all the way in California. And I said, okay. And then I went international. My first international person was Canada, if I'm not mistaken. And then someone in India, and then someone in Australia. So now I'm internationally and nationwide known. So it's been a journey, within a 1 year span. And these magazines behind me, I was featured in those. The podcast is getting up there.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. I love the show, and I'm so happy to have you on. So for the people who do not know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, in today's world, I'm a New York Times bestselling author. I've been full-time as a writer for a little over 11 years now. Okay. I started late in life, similar, I guess, to what you're saying. Like, I was 43 when I published the first book. Okay. Prior to that, I was working in the corporate world. I worked in finance. Wow. I had a job. I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as it sounds. But I basically got stuck there because that's where everybody told me I needed to be. I've been writing my entire life, and my mom encouraged it when I was a kid, but she always added this caveat. She said, writing is a great hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a real job. And like, my parents drilled that into my head. So I did what I was supposed to do. I went off to college, got a couple of degrees, and ended up sitting behind a desk. Hated every second of it. And I would come home at night and I would write. I would work on these different book projects to stay sane. And then just at one point, it all came to a head and just decided to try and make a go at it.
Okay, I love that. And see, a lot of people go through the same thing. I went through that as well, feeling stuck at a job and realizing that's not my purpose. So I'm so proud of you for stepping out and being an example for people you can start anytime. You can do your purpose anytime. So that's inspiring.
I run into people like that all the time. Like, I'll go to the dentist and, like, the woman cleaning my teeth will be like, I really love to paint. But, she's cleaning my teeth. I'm like, well, why don't you try to, make something happen as a painter? And it's like, it's one of those things where it doesn't seem like an achievable dream. Mm-hmm. And it's always just, what if, like, it's just always off in the distance. Like in my case, I had been working behind the scenes in publishing, basically at night. So I did the corporate job during the daytime. At night, I worked for publishers and for editors as a book doctor and a ghostwriter, basically helping other people get their books written and published. I did that for 23 years. And over those 23 years, I hit 6 different books that came out and hit the New York Times list that all had other people's names on the cover that I had essentially written, which gets old. And my wife pulled me aside when that sixth one hit up, and she said, listen, I know you want to become a full-time author. Let's figure out a way to make this happen. But at this point I was stuck because I had the corporate job and it paid really well, which was probably, a big part of my problem.
Right.
And we had the trappings of all that. We had a big house, we had cars, we had a boat, and our monthly nut just to sustain all that was like $10,000 to $12,000. And so I couldn't just walk away from the day job because we couldn't afford the lifestyle. So my wife came up with this crazy plan. We sold everything that we owned.
Wow.
And then we bought a tiny little duplex in Pittsburgh. We rented out one side of the duplex to some tenants, and we moved into the other side. Basically got to the point where we could live off of savings long enough for me to write that first book. And it took that kind of pressure, I think, for me to really do it. It was a total lifestyle change. And there was no plan B. I had to write a book. It had to sell. It needed to pay the bills. That was it.
Yes. I love you said no plan B. That's
I write in today's world. I write a lot with James Patterson. We've gotten to know each other really well. And one of the things he told me early on is hope is not a strategy.
Yes.
And it's 3 words, but when you really think about it, it is just so true. You can hope for this, you can hope for that, you can have a dream that you want, but that's not a strategy. You have to come up with an actual plan to make it all happen. And it's all doable. My biggest fear was, being 80 years old, sitting in a rocking chair on a porch somewhere, going, what if, what if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? And at that point, it might be too late. Maybe not. Yes. I know a couple 80-year-olds that are writing books, but
right. Yeah,
you know what I mean.
I understand exactly what you mean. Yeah, I think Coco Chanel, I think at 70 something. So yeah, it's never too late, and that's amazing. Nope. Yeah. Okay, come on now, I love it. So, I saw a little bit about your book. So, love. Okay, number one. So, how do you see the future of hybrid publishing evolving, and what should authors do to start now to get ahead of the curve?
Well, hybrid publishing is kind of a term that I just kind of coined for what I'm doing. So my very first book that I put out, it was called Forsaken, and I indie published it. And if you've got authors that listen to your show, they're gonna understand what that means. Yeah. But I acted as my own publishing house. I put out that book all by myself. I sold a lot of copies of it, and because of that, I ended up on the radar of the traditional publishers. So my next book deal, I got a 7-figure deal for through HMH, which is now part of HarperCollins, and I did a series of books through the traditional publishers. But I had gotten a taste of being an indie author. And when you're an indie author, you have total control. You are your own company. You get to run the entire show. And the economics are better. You make about 70 cents on the dollar. And with the traditional deal, they'll pay you, they give you a nice big advance check, which is nice, but you've got to pay that money back, and you're paying it back at like 15 or 20 cents on the dollar. So after I got a couple books in on the traditional side, I realized there's no real magic in what somebody like Penguin Random House is doing. Anybody can do what they're doing. I thought I was going to learn some secret, recipe or something that they all knew and the rest of us didn't, but it wasn't like that. So I got like 4 or 5 books in, and I told my agent, listen, I want to try mixing this up. I want to try a hybrid approach. So for a book I had called The Caller's Game, I published it through my own indie press domestically, so in English, Canada, UK, America, that kind of thing. And then we sold all the foreign rights to all the foreign publishers that handled my other books. And I'm in about 150 different countries, so there were still a lot of people involved. But we ended up publishing it that way, and I really liked that model because it gave me the control that I wanted. I was able to do what I wanted, got the book out there, and got to take advantage of the economics of basically being an indie publisher. Which worked out well for a little while, but there were certain places I still couldn't get into. I couldn't get into like Target and Costco and Walmart, CVS, the big box stores.
Right.
You can, but as an indie author, to give you an example, if you want to get into Walmart, you have to be ready to print like 10 to 20,000 copies of your book. And they will order all 10 to 20. They will put them in every Walmart out there. But if they don't sell, they will return them to you, and they expect a full refund for that. So you're on the hook for that cost. So it's big dollars that are floating around, and it's scary stuff. And you don't necessarily want to do that. But ultimately, a few years ago, I had a book coming out called Behind a Closed Door. I sent it off to my agent. We immediately got a film deal on it, which got all the publishers excited. And the offers started to come in from the big publishers. And then I got a phone call from a friend of mine who worked at Random House. And she said, listen, we're about to offer on your book, but when that comes in, you need to turn it down. And I asked her why, and she said, well, we've got problems in the industry, and there's a lot of layoffs that are coming. We're going to be laying off a lot of people, and the editor who wants your book is on that list. So I took a step back, talked to my agent, and ultimately I reached out to friends of mine that I knew from back in the finance days, and I got a conversation going with Simon & Schuster. They had recently been bought by a private equity firm. So I started a conversation and a back channel thing with them, and ultimately we came upon basically a new business model. They allowed me to create my own imprint at Simon & Schuster, and they handle my print sales and distribution. So at this point, I basically have my own publishing company, but Simon & Schuster handles the heavy lifting, which gets me into all those places that I wanted to get into before, which I think is kind of the future of the whole publishing model. And I know that's a very long answer to the question you just asked me, but I want to cover all the bases for your listeners to make sure I didn't leave anything out.
No, you gave good detail because these are things people want to know. Like, one, how do I get into Walmart, Target, and places like that? And you literally explained exactly what needs to be done. So, wow, because there's you found a way around it. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. That's kind of how I've approached this from the beginning. Like every time I put out a book, I try to, figure out how can I use this book to basically expand my audience? How can I get it someplace where I wasn't before? That kind of thing. And it's worked so far.
Right. It has. And that's amazing. Okay. So I'm happy. That's good. So, your newest novel, Something I Keep Upstairs, you basically like did that off of like a haunted house tour. So what made you decide to market that novel, and how can entrepreneurs learn from that?
Well, one of the things that, writing is basically half the job when you're an author. At the middle of the day, I have to take my writer hat off and I have to put my business hat on.
Yes.
So every time I've got a new book coming out, I basically look at what everybody else is doing in the industry to sell their books, make a list of that, and then I try to come up with something that nobody's doing. And that's basically what I focus on to sell my books. My general thinking is I can get out there and if I do everything that everybody else is doing, my books will get, I'll sell maybe right here, but I'll never excel beyond what those people are doing because I'm not doing anything different. But if I come up with something outside the box, then I can take it up to here and come up with a different level.
Right.
So with this particular book, it's a haunted house story, like you mentioned. The tagline for the book is, for a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die, which, it's basically an angle on the haunted house story that I had never heard before, because every haunted house book, movie, they all kind of have the same plot. Husband and wife buy a house, they move in, something weird happens, something weirder happens, they investigate, realize something really bad happened a long time ago, and then either they fix it and everybody, everything ends well, or it goes horribly wrong. But it's always that same story. But I wanted something different. So in my story, it's about a 17-year-old kid. His grandmother passes away and she leaves him a house. And it's a perfectly ordinary house, but it's on a private island. And she leaves him a ton of money along with it. So he does exactly what you would expect a 17-year-old kid to do. He takes that house and he turns it into a party house for him and his friends. It's someplace where they can go and hang out and basically enjoy their last summer together before they head off to college. But at one point, partying gets old. Somebody raises their hand and say, "Hey, what would it take to turn this house into a haunted house?" So they start exactly where you would expect. There's a Ouija board. There's a couple of scary stories, but things slowly escalate. And the tagline for the book: "For a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die." So where they're going in the book. It's really all about that journey. So I had the book done, and I had to figure out, how am I going to market this? Well, the house in my story is actually based on a real house that really exists. I live in a little island called Newcastle, right off the coast of Portsmouth in New England. And right off the coast of our island is a tiny little island that's only about an acre, called Wood Island. And there's one house on it. And you can see it from our beach. It's about a quarter mile away. And I saw it from the day that I moved here. I see it almost every day, and just that what if gene in me started going off. So I knew I wanted to base my book on that story. Turns out that the house itself used to be a Coast Guard life-saving station back in the 40s and 50s, and it had fallen into complete disrepair. It was literally just falling over. And a local guy a few years back, he raised, I think it was $7 million to restore it. And I got to know him. So while I was writing the book, he was giving me information on the house, things like the floor plan and the history, anything that he knew about it. And I was writing the book. He's renovating this property. And then when the book was ready to come out, I asked him a simple question: "Would you let me give away an overnight stay in the house?" And he said yes, because in today's world, that house is a museum. They actually decorated the interior to match what I have in my book, which is really cool.
It is cool.
But that became the basis of the marketing plan for this particular title. So we put out a press release. Author, is giving away an overnight stay in a haunted house, the basis of his book, to one lucky winner and 3 of their friends. And as soon as we put that press release out, newspapers started writing it up. I did a bunch of television interviews, a bunch of radio station interviews, because nobody's ever done that.
Right.
And all of that press was free. It didn't cost me a dime. but it created an incredible word of mouth. It was all over social media. A lot of people were talking about it, and that sold a lot of copies of the book, basically for free. So I could have done what everybody else does. I could have bought Amazon ads and Facebook ads and thrown a bunch of money at that, and I would have sold a decent number of copies. But doing something like this, something that nobody's ever done before, sells a lot of copies.
Yes.
So that's what I strive for with each book. The problem is you can't repeat anything.
No.
Once you come up with that, I mean, it's kind of gimmicky. So once you do it, it's over. So you need something new for the next one. But to me, that's fun. I enjoy that challenge, trying to come up with that idea.
You know what? While you were talking, I was having like a vision in my head, because when you're like explaining a book or explaining something, I could see it like literally vividly, like a movie. So while you was talking, I saw one movie being done, like of the actual book, but then I also saw you being like the main character of another movie, basically saying like, okay, I have a book, I did a press release, and it went viral everywhere, and four friends at this point got into the haunted house, and like, I see all of that. Like I could see that being a movie, like you being the main character as the book author, and because I feel like I've seen a movie like that before, but if I have it, that should be a movie, and you should star in it.
I honestly need to get better about that, because we could have filmed a documentary about this whole process along the way, and that's definitely a thought that my team and we discussed it at the beginning. But there's only 27 hours in the day, so we weren't able to do it. I wish we would have, because it was a really fun experience, I think, for everybody involved, even the people who got to stay there. And in today's world, that house, like a lot of people visit it because of my book, which makes it even more fun.
Yep.
Being in New England, like in Portsmouth in particular, we've got ghost tours. They're all over the place, and they all talk about my book. They talk about Wood Island and the haunted house out there. They stand on the beach and point to it, or you can actually take a tour of it. You can get in a boat and you can actually go out to it and you can tour the house. So it's a whole experience.
Wow, that's so cool. I'll give you 5 seconds to send us an email saying that you want to be a partner with us. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So you said that authors have to dare to think differently to survive today's market. What's one safe rule of publishing you think writers should seriously reconsider or break entirely?
I think you can break pretty much any rule in this industry once you understand it. The one thing I'm very particular about, though, is I think every book needs to be a 5-star read before it goes out anywhere, because that's what you're competing with in today's world. You can put out a mediocre book, and you can sell or you can buy a bunch of ads and you can get people to buy it. But what ends up happening is, your friends and family buy the book, they review it, so you get 10 or 25-star reviews. Then the real readers start to find it and they start criticizing the problems. And all of a sudden your average drops to like a 3 or whatever. And you can keep buying, you can keep throwing money at it and buying more ads, buy more ads and get more people to buy it. But the second you stop those ads, the sales dry up. Because the truth is, the only thing that actually sells books or sells anything in real life is word of mouth. You need one person to read that book and they need to tell 3 of their friends how good it was. And then those 3 friends need to run out and buy it. And that's what makes a book sustainable. So it's got to be a 5-star read before it leaves the gate. And I run into so many people that try to take shortcuts with that. And there isn't any. You have to, in my case, I hire professionals for editing, for proofreading, cover design, every aspect of it. I hire all that stuff out to people that are way better at it than I am, to make sure that product that I'm putting out, and that's what it is at the end of the day, a product is the best possible product that I can create. I think you got to start there.
Yes. And you speak a little bit about business. So what does brand mean to you outside of social media, outside of sales?
Well, brand is huge. And, it's funny because you get a lot of pushback on it as an author.
Yes.
So like when my first book came out through a traditional publisher, my name was real small. The title of the book was real big. And it ended up in the bookstore just on a shelf way in back. And like I walked into Barnes and Noble hoping to see it. And, I got struck by the same names I always see. Here's Stephen King over here on this wall. Nora Roberts, here's James Patterson. Their books are all facing out. Their names are huge. The title is small. And then I had to go all the way to the back of the store under B for Barker and find my book out there. And, I got my business brain going. Like, what do I need to do to flip this? And it is all about brand. It's like you can kind of see the book behind me, the lights glaring on it a little bit.
I can see it.
But my name on that book is trademarked. So I've got a trademarked version of my name. I always ensure that it's a percentage bigger than the actual title of the book on every book that I put out, and all that stuff is in my contracts, so they can't get around it. If they want to publish the book, they have to do these things. And I create the brand awareness. So like that particular font and my name in that style appears on all my book covers now in a lot of different countries. And because of that, it just becomes recognizable. Like you see the name Kraft, like you could be buying anything. It could be mac and cheese. It could be this, it could be that, but like, that name, that font.
Yep.
And because of that familiarity, it makes it that much easier for you to pull the trigger on it. So I focused on brand very heavily. And one of the other things, like when I took a step back and looked at it, like I'm a huge Stephen King fan.
Same.
So I looked at his covers, the way his name was, but also the stories themselves and the way that they're marketed. Like most of us will walk into a bookstore if you're a Stephen King fan or a fan of any author, and you'll buy that book because their name is on the cover. It has nothing to do with what the story is about. So I wanted to try and create a similar model to that. So very early on, I did exactly what my agents and editors didn't want me to do. I started with a horror novel, then I wrote a thriller novel. I basically bounced around in different genres. They hate that because they want to pigeonhole you. They want to say that this person is a thriller author, so that they know exactly how to market you, where to put you in the store, and they never want that to change. They want to market to that same group over and over and over again. But to me, that doesn't make any sense. How am I supposed to expand my brand if I'm selling to the same people every single time?
Yes.
So I look at the books as a way to basically improve my audience, make it larger. So like at one point, my editor called me and he said, "Okay, it looks like your audience is women 45 and over. That's who's buying your books. We need to write a book that appeals to them." So I turned around and I wrote a young adult book. Because I didn't want to do what he was saying. I wanted to expand my audience. So I wrote a young adult book. It's called She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be. It's basically a retelling of Great Expectations. Now that book in today's world, they teach it in high school. The high schools have their students read it because it's basically like a gateway into the classics. Like it reads like a modern day thriller. So students like the writing style. Once they read this, then they'll go out and they'll pick up Charles Dickens' Great Expectations because that's what it's based on. So it kind of opens that door. But what it did for me is it brought in all these younger readers, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And it took that number, women 45 and over, and skewed it down. And all of a sudden I've got teenagers and I've got people in their 20s reading my books. So I use the books themselves to go out there almost like a literary Pied Piper. If there's a particular audience that's not reading my books, I'm going to find a way to write a book to grab that audience and bring them into the fold.
That's good. And see, you're like talking about business and books at the same time, which is like for authors, it's kind of hard to do because it's really just the writing. I want to write. So like, what advice would you give authors who need to also get some business in their mindset?
Yeah, it's tough because a lot of authors just aren't good at both.
No.
Like I came out of a business world. I was working for an investment banking firm in finance. So I saw companies, basically start from an idea and grow to the point of becoming a public company. And I saw all the steps that were involved in that. And I saw it over and over again. So I know how to build a business. And to me, selling books is no different. So I basically flip, my hat, at 11 o'clock in the morning, I stop writing and I focus the rest of the day on business related activities.
Okay.
And I enjoy it, like working with James Patterson has been huge too, because he loves the business side too. Like we'll have just as many conversations about business as we do about, the actual process of writing. But to me, that's fun. I love to expand it. I've been doing a lot of looking at television spots lately, because I think that's a market that most book writers or authors aren't, they're not using right now. They're not utilizing it.
Yes.
And I think there's an opportunity there. So I'm always looking.
I agree. And you just like mentioned like authors turn their books into like film. So I recently saw the Stephen King, The Long Walk. That was good. Okay. So yes, I agree. Like turning your book into a movie or a TV show is good. And I want you to do that too, because I would love to be in a theater. Okay, looking at your movie. That is so amazing.
Me too.
Yes, I can't wait. I'll see it for you. Okay, so
I've got 8 of those, and I've got 8 different books in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell. Nothing's actually been filmed yet, but like everything's been optioned over and over and over again.
Yes.
So to me, it's like a numbers game. Like the more books I put out, the more options I have. Sooner or later, one of them is going to get made. I mean, to give you an idea, like The Long Walk, he wrote that book in like 1970 something, and like the movie just now came out. It's taken that long for them to get it right. So you just never know. My 4MK series, which is my most popular popular book series. It just got optioned for the fourth time. Like CBS optioned
Wow.
it initially. They were going to make a feature film and a TV show. They had it for a couple of years. That didn't happen. It went to somebody else. They didn't get it done. Lionsgate picked it up. They didn't get it done. And now it's with somebody else. And they seem to be moving pretty fast, but you never know. Somebody once told me if you watch the credits at the end of a movie, all those names that go by for 6 minutes,
Yes.
every single person that's named there had to be there in order for that movie to get done.
Wow.
And you take one of them away and all of a sudden that house of cards just falls apart. And that's literally what Hollywood is like.
Literally. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. So you have mentioned that you co-author with James Patterson. So with that being said, how important is partnerships and what are the red flags that you see in most partnerships?
It's huge for me. I mean, like I had mentioned earlier that, when I was working in the corporate world, I worked on books, basically on the side as a book doctor and a ghostwriter.
Right.
All those situations, it was a collaborative project. I was helping another author rewrite their book. I was writing a book for somebody. I was writing a memoir for somebody, but I was always working with somebody else to create that particular book. So when I sat down to write my first solo novel all by myself, that actually felt weird, to write a book without anybody else in the room. So then my second book, I wrote a prequel to Dracula with Bram Stoker's family. So I got to collaborate again. I think it's really important just to figure out everybody's strengths and weaknesses when you start that writing process. And it doesn't even have to be a book. If you're just going to work with somebody else, you have to figure out who's good at what and double down on that and steer clear of the stuff that they're not good at. It's almost like having two people in the kitchen making breakfast at the same time. If you have two people trying to make eggs, you're going to trip over each other, and that's a problem.
Right.
If one person's making eggs while the other one's making bacon or biscuits or something over here, then everything works out. So you have to divide and conquer a little bit. But I think it's important you sit down and you map all that out from the get-go. This is what I'm going to do. This is what you're going to do, and then figure it out from there. Working with Patterson has been, it's been fun because like he's worked with, way more people than I have. So we're both very versed in working with other people. So because of that, we've been able to approach each project differently. Like the very first one, we basically pantsed a novel. I wrote a chapter, then he wrote the next chapter. I wrote the next chapter, and we just went back and forth.
Right.
We've got other ones where he wrote the outline and then I wrote the book. And there's other ones where I wrote the outline and he wrote the book. So like we're both very flexible and able to, pivot like that, which I think is helpful too.
That's really cool. I love that. So I saw that you have some upcoming things, and I'm happy for you. So you have an upcoming prequel called The First Scarlet Door, which is the first book to your three-part prequel series. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this one was a lot of fun. So I originally wrote a book called The Fourth Monkey, and it was supposed to be a standalone book. I didn't expect it to go anywhere else. I just wanted to write a book about a serial killer, so it was a one and done for me. But when my agent took it out to publishers, we had a ton of interest, and she called me up and she said, "Hey, do you have an idea for a sequel?" So I scribbled out an idea to keep the storyline going, and she ended up selling it as a 2-book deal to HMH, which is now part of HarperCollins. Ultimately, I wrote it as a trilogy, so 3 books, and I tied everything up, or at least I thought I did. But in the books, there's 2 different storylines going on. We basically get to know our serial killer through these diaries that he left behind, and they're kind of interspersed with the real life happenings of a police detective chasing down the serial killer and it's his last victim. So you kind of flash back and flash forward and bounce back around in time. And the very first book, The Fourth Monkey, it starts basically in the middle of the action. So a serial killer has been operating in Chicago for the last 5 years. He always does the same thing. He kidnaps his victim, he cuts off their ear, and he mails the ear to the family in a white box tied off with a black string. And that's basically how he starts every killing. So at the beginning of The Fourth Monkey, we've got a guy who's walking across the street to a mailbox to mail a little white box tied with a black string, and he gets hit by a city bus and killed. So the police find him. They realize, their serial killer is dead, but they know that the serial killer has another victim that he's already picked up, and she's out there somewhere, and they've got no idea who she is or where she is. So they have to try to find her. But we basically start everything in the middle of all the action. And, it's when I wrote the book, I had these diary entries that I personally loved. The agents pushed back on them. A lot of them wanted me to take it out and just turn it into a straight up police procedural. But now these books have been out there for almost a decade. And like the diaries are everybody's favorite part. They love getting in the head of that serial killer. But I've only given glimpses of that serial killer. So I wanted to go back and basically tell his story from childhood, explain, what turned him into who he became. How was the serial serial killer basically put together over the years. What things combined, like a perfect storm to create this monster. And that's what the three prequels are all about.
Okay, congratulations on that. That's good.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to write.
That's cool. I love that. So next, do you have like any upcoming events you're going to be attending or hosting that you'd like to share?
My schedule is so insane. Somebody else just asked me that, and like the only thing I've got on my calendar right now is a trip to Spain coming up in a couple of months to promote a new book release. I'm sure I'll be doing something here domestically when First Scarlet Letter comes out, but we haven't mapped out what that's going to be yet.
Okay, I understand. And lastly, give yourself a huge shout out to everyone where they can follow you and shop with you.
Oh, absolutely. The easiest place to find me is at jdbarker.com. You can sign up for my mailing list there to kind of stay on top of everything. The books themselves are in pretty much every bookstore.
Okay. Yes. And I want to thank you so much for coming on Never Gave Denied podcast today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
You're welcome. And remember, yes, life was delayed, but it never gave denied. I'm your host, Anukkah Laquette, and you just listened to Never Gave Denied podcast with JD Barker. Bye, y'all. I know you're not going to deny subscription. It's a whole new season, and you're still playing. Click here to subscribe, and click here for more episodes, because we want to see you and become undeniable with us. Period.